Hi everyone, welcome to the booth at Createx Colors. I'm Chris Arpin, and today we got a little project going on. It's actually a tabletop for the mixing area outside of the booth where we have our paint cabinets. We're going to do a little bit of wood graining. We were trying to kind of think of an idea of what we were going to do with this countertop essentially, and we thought, what better way to do it than a little bit of wood graining? Kind of cool. We haven't done a video like that in a while. There's a lot of videos out there, but we'll kind of show you my take and our take in terms of a couple little tips and tricks and working with our paint and some things you can do to create a really cool effect really easily. So first thing I want to talk about is we're always talking about this test panels. And I have two very large test panels in front of me right here. Now, because of the size, the scope of this project, I wanted to do a larger test panel to get a feel for what it was I'm going to do in terms of having enough working time to work with the paint before it starts to dry and just kind of get a big visual on kind of what technique I want to go with and what works and what doesn't. And we're always talking about that, stressing a test panel. This is something you're doing. I mean, for us here, obviously this is not a big deal because it's a project for us, but if it's something that you're doing for a customer or a client, the last thing you want to do is do that experiment while you're getting right into that job and find out what you thought was going to work isn't going to work. So really cheap. These are just steel panels, leftovers, and I can throw these out. I can sand these down. I can do them again if I want. So just to show you, these are a couple techniques. I don't know how good this one's going to show up. It's kind of dark. Just in trying to get that wood grain. Kind of here, I was actually wiping it with a little bit of reducer to see how easily I'd get a kind of a redactive technique, and obviously it was red underneath. I wouldn't leave that, but so that was this one. This one here is the first step, and a little bit of texture. This is just over a dark, almost black base with a little bit of brown over the top. And I kind of dug what that was doing, but it looks kind of real kind of cookie cutter. So this side, took a little further to get some grain in the background, and then also actually put some candy over the top. So, and again, it kind of illustrates knowing what to do and what not to do. See this pattern, when you're doing wood, it's very organic, right? It's a living thing. So the only real mistake you could make was being too repetitive and making it look very plotted out and cookie cut, which I kind of have right here. I kind of have these rings, these heart rings right here. They're like right on top of each other. I like how this looks. I just didn't like the way that transferred. So again, something you could learn on something like this. I can scrap this and move on to the next. So we'll talk about our substrate. This particular tabletop is MDF. If you guys are familiar with MDF, you know it's kind of cool to work with. If you're not familiar, it's basically glue and sawdust. It's resin and wood pulp kind of mixed together. So it's kind of tricky to work with in terms of the preparation. You want to put a tooth on it, but you don't want to burn through that top. It's almost like a paper layer. So the last thing you want to do is be too aggressive in sand. It gets kind of furry. It'll get fuzzy. So that's kind of the trick with that. MDF, it makes a lot of dust when you are sanding it, so keep that in mind. For this, I actually went ahead and I sanded it with a DA with about 180 grit sandpaper. Now, 180 grit on wood is totally different than 180 on metal, so just keep that in mind. So our first product we're going to apply for kind of my ground coat, again, is my Outerborn Sealer. So I'm going to go with tan right out of the bottle, right? Keep it really simple. I kind of want a lighter base coat, and I want to build up darker values as I move. So the Outerborn Sealer is going to be awesome for that. And the other reason I do like it a lot is once it's dry, in terms of me putting a little bit of reducer over the top or wet paint, it's not going to reactivate the Outerborn Sealer. It's pretty solid. Once you put it down and give it enough drying time, you can manipulate a lot of paint on the top of that, on the surface, and not worry about really pulling all that Outerborn right back down to this MDF. I've done it before where I've done spray outs and candies and something's dropped in the candy. And I'm like, so I took it over to the sink and it literally washed off the candy, and my silver sealer was still on my spray out, my little panel. So it's kind of indicative of what you can do with it, and as long as you let it dry up enough. So that's kind of what I want. I want to seal this up, real simple, 10% Outerborn Sealer tan, right out of the bottle. I'll probably do 2 coats. We'll let that dry really good, and when we come back, I'll start talking about the techniques for actually applying the wood grain. Hi guys, welcome back. 2 coats of my tan Autoborn sealer is down. You can see it is totally dry. And again, I hate to sound like a broken record. I say this every time we're doing a project and we're painting. The key to your success with our paint is to let it completely dry between coats. And essentially for this, because we're going to be doing a lot of layering, and some of it is airbrush, some of it is kind of a roller, some of it is brush and dry brush and redactive and application, you really want to make sure that this substrate, this first coat, your primer essentially, right, your ground coat is totally dry, because it's going to be essential. You don't want to start kind of re-wetting it and moving around and having problems. So I thought this would be a good time to kind of illustrate what we have in terms of our color palette. That you might not be totally familiar with. We have in front of me a lot of our Wicked Detail colors, right? So these are more of an artist palette. You can see on these shapes, some of them, the Wicked colors have a little bit of a shine to them, but all the Wicked Details, these are really flat. They dry fairly flat. And we have everything from ochres and red oxides to a carmine over here, Payne's gray, to sepias and everything in between. So a lot of colors to play with. And I also have a bottle of our new Wicked Opaque Cream. This is kind of a nice color too. It's kind of like an off-white. it's cream, but it really covers extremely well. So if you're trying to do highlights, I'm gonna come back and kind of do some scratching with it and just give some highlights and push back some of the texture of the paint itself to emulate that wood. It's great because it's going to cover extremely well right out of the gate. I'm not going to have to apply multiple coats. So again. The beauty part of this is you can work right out of the bottle. You really don't have to start with 2 different colors and start cocktailing your own. I mean, you most certainly can, but one of the nice things is just be able to kind of grab a bottle that you're looking, I want to be a little more red, I want to be a little more brown, I want to be a little more like even green shade, or you know, I want to be a little more yellow. It's right out of the bottle. And what I'm going to do is just continue to mix. This is actually the cup that I mix my sealer in. I'm going to mix right back in this cup. I'm not worried about the color that's in my sealer, right? My sealer tan. What I'm going to do is once I clear this table back off, I'm going to cocktail a few colors together and just kind of mix. And I just kind of want to stripe this board, kind of give it some character lines. I'm going to do is zero in my spray gun. I'm going to use an LPH 80 and close up my fan control, right? So it's a little more concentrated. Just want to kind of give this piece a little bit more character and create light and dark highlights. And again, it's kind of that layering process and not just. We're trying to make this look like real wood, not make it look like something we tried to make look like wood, you know, like a print. So that's kind of key. So that's going to be the next step. And I'm just going to take a few light colors and dark colors, kind of mix them together as I go. There's no right or wrong. I'm sure we're going to get questions on certain colors. You know, if you guys wanted to do more of an oak, like a golden oak, you'd obviously go more in the yellow shade. You can push this towards a mahogany or like a cherry with more of the reds, the red shade, you know, like the burnt, not the raw. The raw umber is a little more yellow, the burnt's a little more brown. Then we have the carmine, and there's a few other colors even that you could kind of mix in. You could mix in reds, you know, a little bit of Wicked Red in with the brown and make a red shade brown and kind of tint your color palette that way. The only recommendation I'm going to give is kind of start lighter and work your way darker, because you're going to kind of want to add some detail and some of that scratching or some of that wood grain. It works better with a darker color over the top. So the last thing you want to do is start really dark, and then it's to the point where you almost need black in order to kind of give a definition of what it is you're trying to do and that texture. And if you do them black, it kind of looks like that panel I did first, where it's really dark and it just kind of, it looks like it's printed. You know, like we took something and we wanted to make it look like wood grain, like a vinyl. So start light and work your way dark. You can always add a little bit more color, and if worst case, you can always come back in and pop some highlights with a little bit of the white or lighter colors. Not so much white, but an off-white color just to kind of bring it up naturally. And another good thing is just get some references. You know, have a couple pictures of different wood grain patterns that you dig, just to kind of give you direction, you know, as it is you're working. It's really easy to kind of get lost. And that's the other thing too, like I said, is this is organic, right? This was a living thing. Wood is living, breathing. So it's not like a cookie cutter pattern where it's kind of repetitive. So don't kind of focus and kind of pigeonhole yourself into one super concentrated area. Just kind of run with it. If you don't like it, you can literally just kind of wipe it off and start again. That's the beauty part of doing this. There is really no right or wrong, as long as you're kind of giving that organic kind of a look. So I'm going to go ahead and stop talking. I'm going to clear this stuff off. I'm going to get a couple colors mixed up in the gun. show you guys what I mean when I say, close up that the fluid control or the fan control and just kind of stripe a little bit here and just kind of give some light and dark values. So stick around, we'll get the booth running, and I'll see you in a second. All right, guys, welcome back. Got a little color mixed up, the booth is running, and real quick, I just want to show you what I meant when I said zero it in, right? I talk about this quite a few times. My fan control, right? So this is my LPH80. This guy right here is your fluid control. That means how far back you can pull your trigger, right? So that's just stopping the needle from coming in the nozzle. Above that is your fan control. So wide open gives you a nice big fan, and then closing it up kind of needles it in. It makes it real tight in terms of a round pattern. You can almost draw with it. Get it really small. So I'm going to keep it closed up, maybe just open a quarter turn from fully open, just so I can come in and kind of work a pattern, start kind of just doing like a real rough sketch of creating a grain, just kind of linear. I don't want to be sporadic the way I do this. I kind of want to keep in trend. My grain is going to kind of go the length of the table, so I'm going to just kind of try to keep it linear and kind of work with the table. So we'll go ahead and do dark first. This is actually the tan, the sealer tan color that I had. I added a little bit of sepia to it. So a little bit of sepia, drop of Payne's gray just to darken it a little touch. I don't really want to use black because I don't want to muddy it. So just darker than what the tan, as you can see, that's a little more brown on there. It's a little bit darker. And then what I'll do is I'll come back. If I want to darken up a little more, I could actually just take a little bit of that Wicked, we have smoke black or the Payne's gray, and I can kind of edge it with that. And then I'll come back and I'll mix a lighter tone the same way, and I'll do a couple highlights and just kind of random striping essentially to kind of lay the groundwork of what we're going to do. So we'll show you what that looks like. Kind of going through and connect a few of them together, make it heavy in the middle, fade out to nothing, kind of disappear, come back. The last thing you want to do is kind of grid it so it looks like line after line after line. You just kind of want it to be, again, it's linear, but it doesn't necessarily have to be razor straight. We're not trying to do it like we had a ruler here, like fine line tape where we just stripe it again. You're starting to get in that repetitive pattern, and it just takes away from that realistic kind of natural growth of it. So just keep coming back. And again, there is no right or wrong. If there's something you do that you don't like, come back. You can A, wipe it off, or bury it with the next coat of color. And you can't be super critical of yourself either. If you're looking at it and you're like, man, I don't like how that looks. Remember, we're not trying to make this look like wood grain in this step. This is just layering that foundation so we can build. The last thing you want to do is just have a really clean ground coat. It's just not going to look real. You know, you have to have that texture. So don't be super critical of what it is you're doing. Hi guys, welcome back. My first color I already put on. You guys kind of broke away. I saw I was doing a dark color. What I did was actually, as I finished just kind of spraying those lines, I came in with a brush, just like a 3-inch, kind of a, it's not a chip brush, it's a little better. It won't leave bristles behind. And what I'm doing is spraying and then just kind of dragging that out, right? So it kind of helps blend in those airbrush lines where they just look like straight lines. Start to develop a little bit of that texture I was talking about, kind of starting to push this. Again, this is all going to be in the very, very bottom. This is the background color. So what I have right now is actually a lighter version of that color. Remember before I had the sealer tan, and I added a little sepia to that with a splash of Payne's gray to make it dark. Now I kind of went the other way. This is actually the same cup. I haven't washed out my gun. I haven't rinsed anything. I've actually been just mixing the same exact cup and everything, and even the same mixing stick. So what I did was add a little bit of our Wicked Opaque Cream. So I'm going to kind of lighten that value up. And all I'm doing is kind of just spraying a highlight area and then immediately coming in with my brush and kind of just dry brushing blending that out to kind of get a little bit of texture. I'll go ahead, I'll show you guys, I'll do an example right here too. I'll spray. You can also kind of vary your, kind of wiggle it, drag it out, and it'll kind of give that kind of a distressed look. You can get really fancy, you can start spinning it and kind of create kind of a textured effect. If that's what you were after. Again, this is really just to start to build up the background texture. This isn't the final picture of what we're trying to achieve. So I'm not super concerned if there's a really sharp transition from light to dark, because I can go back in after I drag this entire thing and I'll airbrush little highlights, lowlights. Again, we'll kind of just stripe that pattern in before we actually do that actual final grain over the top. So again, this is just the ground coat, right? We're trying to vary textures in light and dark and make it look like a natural piece of wood that's kind of scratched up and chipped in here and there. So I'm gonna go ahead and finish up this, and we'll talk about the dry brush when we come back. All right, guys, we are back. Everything's dry. I kind of went ahead and pushed back some of those lighter areas that I used as a demonstration. I didn't really want them super, super light. So I just went ahead and same thing. I had a little bit of dark color to mix up. I mixed a little more sepia and just kind of pushed them into the background. So that's actually what I have right here. I have some raw umber, and this is what we're gonna do. We're gonna talk about that dry brush. This is the same brush. So I'm actually just gonna take a little bit of this right out of the bottle. I have a little bit of palette paper here, a piece of wax paper, anything you can use as a palette. And you just wanna get the bristles, the tips of the bristles. All right, and what we're doing is just doing just that, just dragging this brush to get these lines. All right, so come back, continue on dragging. And you just kind of want that random, you don't want all the bristles. If there's a little too much, you can kind of come back and brush it off. So I have a towel right here. I'll just come back, brush this off, and keep going. You don't want to hold the brush down. You want to keep it basically perpendicular to the surface, right? So you are just using the bristles to create a little bit of texture. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Dark across this whole thing, then I'll come back and do the same thing. I'll go with a lighter color, kind of do some scratches or some highlights in the wood, and we're going to let that dry, and then we'll actually start doing that patterned portion of the actual, like a heartwood of the grain itself. So I'll see you guys in a little bit. All right, guys, welcome back. It is day 2. You see, change of clothes. We let this sit up and dry in between doing everything else. Got a lot going on in here. When we broke away, I was talking about that dry brush technique, and one thing I wanted to touch on, you don't need a crazy fancy brush to do that. Actually, what works the best is something with a stiff bristle. So the chip brushes, these are awesome because these are like disposable, so once they get trashed, actually once they start getting paint on them and it dries up a little bit, it really works better for this technique because you get that random kind of drag in terms of creating that wood grain. So keep them, if you use them for something else, keep them in your drawer, like another tool in your toolbox, and bust them out for a project like this. So stiffer brush works best. And I have kind of this really soft nylon. This is actually made for water-based paint. It's from Purdy, to blend out, right? So it's kind of like that last kind of buffer in terms of once you put these paint lines on, just to kind of soften those edges and go through and kind of blend out so it doesn't look so stark. You know, sometimes it's a little too sharp is a little too much. One of the things I also want to talk about too real quick before we go on to the next step, because we broke away, I was showing kind of the technique, and I kind of want to just focus on a couple other tips. Water bottle, right? So a little spray bottle like this, whether you use tap water, if you're doing it right away, tap water works good. So if you're going to do your stroke and then you're going to come back with a little bit of water, spritz it, and you can kind of soften that edge as well. Use that as a blender, essentially almost like a blending solvent. It's the water. If you wait a little bit longer, you have 2 other options. You have a 4013 reducer. It's a little bit hotter in terms of the aggressiveness of a reducer. And then last, we have a 4020. This is super aggressive. This is one of the reasons we really don't recommend this straight up in any of our paints. We're always talking about 4011, but in a case like this, I basically use 4020 to clean my spray equipment. So I soak my tips, my needles, my air caps, and my spray guns in 4020, but it works really well for a kind of a redactive technique in terms of putting a little bit in a cup and then using your brush, kind of dip and go, and then you can create little spatter effects and kind of flick a little bit on and then let that dry and pat it with a towel. So it works really well. I know last time when Scott McKay was here, he did a video and he was using 40-20 in the skull video, and he was using it to kind of create a little bit of texture, kind of that background, spraying it on and wiping it off. So that's kind of one of those things that comes into play if you want to build texture. And again, this whole process is kind of designed to build up your background, because the last step is going to be something really, really cool. And that's, I don't know if you guys have seen these, but it's this rubber squeegee kind of deal, right? So there's a couple different ones. There's a bunch of these out there, small, big, different patterns. And what we're going to do is we're going to mix up a color. You can also get kind of a spreader too, and it has different shapes. And once you apply the paint, you can kind of come in and use that to take it off and create. You got all kinds of different lines. You can find these online. They're out there. Faux finishing shops have them too. But what we're going to do is create a glaze. So now, earlier when I was doing all this, when we talked about mixing, I said I'm using basically colors straight up, right? Straight out of the bottle. I'm not mixing any 40-50. I'm not looking to make it really, really durable at this point, because I kind of want to be able to manipulate it. I don't want it to dry fast, and I don't want to really create a surface where I can't kind of redact a little bit or pull some off, which is another thing which is actually really cool for doing some kind of fine details. That's where our illustration colors kind of come into play really well too, because these, if you guys are familiar with the illustration, they're designed to be manipulated. So we have a full line. This is actually a bloodline, Tim Gore's bloodline, the Decay, which is really cool. It's kind of that sepia umber kind of mix. Works really well for tinting, right? So I was able to spray on a little bit with an airbrush and immediately kind of brush it out, because it stays, you can manipulate it. It's a great feature of that paint, and that's for this particular application works wonderfully without mixing it with anything else. So for the last step of this, we're going to create a glaze. And when I say glaze, what we're going to want to do is create a color that we can spray. I'll use a spray gun, spray this entire tabletop, and then go back over that while the paint is still wet, and you basically just kind of put this on the surface, and I'll show you guys, you kind of rock it. Right? And that's what actually gives you this grain pattern, just how you manipulate and how you roll this on the surface. It's really cool. It creates a really cool effect, and it looks awesome. And people don't realize how simple it is using one of these tools. So in order for that to happen, we want to create that glaze. We want to slow down the dry time. We want to keep it open a little bit longer. So what we're going to do is use a little bit of our 5607. This is a retarder, okay? There's a reason it comes in a small bottle, because a bottle this size should pretty much last you a lifetime. It's a very small amount. If I was going to mix a quart of paint, I would probably use a 1/4 ounce of this, right? Not a lot, so you're not hammered. What will happen is, if you use too much of this product, it will hinder the product from drying, right? You will slow it down so much that it actually won't dry. No matter what you do, it's going to really keep it tacky, sticky, so you have to use it very sparingly. So again, I'm kind of going by the recommendation of about 1/4 ounce to 32 ounces. So if we're mixing a 1/2 quart here, we're probably going to do, oh man, not a whole bunch. You know, we're talking drops at this point. But what we're trying to do is just slow down the dry time, and also this is a point where turning off your fan or kind of cutting your airflow once you're done spraying. So like the second I put my last coat down, I obviously want to evacuate the overspray, but I'm going to turn my fan off because I don't want air movement while I'm trying to do this, because again, we're trying to slow down that evaporation. So what I'm going to do is mix two colors. I wanted kind of a darker color for the top of this, because what's going to happen is wherever you wipe this off, basically everything on the raised surface of this is going to get taken off, and everything that's in between the fins is going to stay behind. So you kind of want to keep that in mind, have a contrasting color. So for this, I have a lighter base. I want a darker color to really give that wood grain look. So I'm going to mix, I have raw umber and our sepia. Again, our detail sepia. This has become kind of a color I use throughout this whole project. I'm going to go 1-to-1. And then I'm going to mix that, probably about 30%, 25-30% of our transparent base. Now the transparent base is a product that is essentially the base the resin of these colors. The reason I'm choosing, again, not to use 4050 is because 4050 is a little more substantial in terms of the content, right? It's a gloss top coat. We use that for our candies. It's really, really durable. And for doing this, I don't want something that durable. I want to be able to manipulate it. And the 4050 dries a bit faster than the R4004. So basically all I'm doing is I'm extending these colors with the same base resin that they're made with. So I'm going to go ahead and get that mixed. We'll start spraying, and I'll show you guys the last step of this. All right, guys, welcome back. Got my color mixed up. I went 1-to-1, and I actually added just a touch of black. I did a little drop of Wicked Opaque black. I did a few spray outs on the paper here, on the masking paper, and it was real similar to the color, so I wanted just a touch darker, so I added just a drop of black. So that's something, again, we always recommend doing a spray out to test and make sure everything's good. So that's why I sprayed that, and that's kind of what I come up with. So it's an easy way for me to start and see where I'm at in terms of the color before I get right into it and start spraying and go, oh, that's not what I want. So again, a test panel thing, real cheap, insurance. So what I'm going to do is this is a 3M gun with a 1.4, and I barely reduced this. So I put a little bit of that transparent base, like I said, and a splash of that retarder. I want to just put a nice even coat over this entire area, and then I'm going to immediately go shut my booth fan off, and then I'm going to start wood graining this. So I taped off this upper section of this backsplash area just because I don't want to work on this area and run the risk of dragging back into what I did, so I can come back tomorrow once this is dry and I'll tape off here and I'll do the top part and kind of blend it in. So we're going to get right into it. We're going to give this a shot, and we're going to start spraying. All right, guys, booth is off, and I am ready to start going. So what we do with this is just slowly roll, and then bring it back up. And you kind of dictate what you want the pattern to look like by how you roll this. You can wiggle it, you drag it nice and easy. You keep it straight the whole way. I'm not sure if you guys can see that, but that's looking really cool. Now, again, I got that towel. Just going to dry that off, and I'll continue on with another pass. And this one, what I'll do is, right off the bat, the last thing you want to do is end up with a grain that looks exactly like what is right next to it. And again, you lose that realistic kind of approach, that real kind of wood grain look to it, because it ends up starting to just look real cookie cutter if it's like the same, if all these overlaps are in the exact same spot. You end up with that look that looks like you tried to emulate it rather than a natural thing. So what I'll do too is, again, different shapes, right? So I'll switch to one of these guys. And just kind of easy rock it. Just a little bit of that hand movement, you can see, dramatically changes the look. Okay, guys, now I'm back. I'm going to use this guy. And now I just kind of want to have just a straight line. I'm just going to follow that grain pattern. That's at the end. This is just essentially like a comb. So I'm just trying to follow the lines of the edge of that first one. Probably finish this off here this way, the same way. Because then I got to work my edges back. So again, depending on what you're going after, I kind of dig that there. I might finish off with another bigger grain. Just kind of overlap the edge with this big guy. And not really rock it as much. All I'm going to do is push this one. So now you can really see what I was talking about, guys, when I said the major work, everything is in that ground coat and what we did underneath. So again, rather than just doing one color on top of another color, it still has that wood grain look, but you kind of lose that realistic effect if you don't have that, all those scratches and splatters and that dragging effect. So really the time you spend underneath is really crucial in terms of getting that realistic approach and that real, killer looking wood look. So we're gonna let this set up a little bit and see. I might come back in, kind of soft brush a little bit of this out, kind of make it look a little bit more natural so it's not so sharp. But we'll see you guys in a second when we finish this up. All right, guys, we're back. Took a quick break. I just kind of finished off the front edge of here. Really made sure I was happy with how it looks, which I am. And now what I'm doing is I'm grabbing that really soft brush, and this is crucial. You want something extremely soft to really just kind of come back over and just drag out. If you look at the grain pattern, almost on real wood, it kind of has that fuzzy, right? So anytime there's a ring, it kind of has that look where it's kind of, I don't know how to describe it, but just kind of like feathered out, pulled, right? So any place where I have a little bit heavier on the base color or the color that's kind of creating this wood grain, I'm just going through and just dry brushing this out, just kind of flicking that. And all it's doing is just kind of pulling a little more of that paint buildup so it doesn't look so much like, essentially like I sprayed through a stencil, where I have that hard line. I'm just going and softening that edge and just makes it look a little bit more organic, a little more natural in terms of something that was real rather than, again, what we said, something that we tried to emulate, So again, just back and forth. Just trying to knock those edges off, those high spots, those sharp lines that kind of look, I guess, a little bit fake. And again, because of the way this is and taking our time in terms of that coat, that first coat, that sealer coat, if you were not happy with this, right, this glaze, and you're like, I don't like how it looks, you could very easily damp towel, damp sponge, wipe this off and start again. Because again, it's only one coat, so it's very easy at this stage. You might have a little bit of distortion of the underlying grain, but again, you can see what's going on here in terms of all that is just to create a visual background that's got something going on. It's kind of busy in the background other than just being a solid color. So don't be concerned if you see something that you don't like, you can adjust it. And again, the beauty part of this is there's really no right and wrong. So I'm going to continue on, get this happy before it dries up on me, and we'll see you guys when I'm all set. All right, guys, welcome back. We're going to call this one done. We gave it plenty of time to dry. This one I want to talk about. Let this overnight. Again, totally dry. The fact that we did add a little bit of that retarder is going to slow down the drying process. So if you have a little bit of air movement once you're totally done, it's going to help you out immensely. But really, an overnight cure before you start to top coat is definitely recommended. So at this point, you could go ahead, kind of break your airbrush out and kind of dial in some areas if you wanted to. You could add more detail, but I think at this point we're going to call this one done. For here, again, this is in a mixing area where I am mixing paint, so I'm not super concerned with it. Really happy with how it came out. So really to finish this off, I am going to use our UVLS product, right? So I'm going to use our 4051 and our 4052. They're satin in our mat. I'm going to mix them 1-to-1. And that's going to kind of knock off that. I kind of want this sheen, this finish, so not super flat, but not really shiny either, if that makes sense. So we're gonna mix them 1-to-1. It's gonna give a really nice, even kind of look, lock all this in. And what I might actually do is put a couple coats and sand it, and then do a couple more coats on the top just to kind of level in a little bit. It's kind of what your preference would be. Sometimes having that texture is going to kind of improve the look and make it look more realistic, like a natural wood product. Certain areas where we were a little more aggressive when we kind of did the graining, and kind of flow that in a little bit and kind of alleviate some of those bumps. But we'll see what it looks like. We'll do 3 coats and kind of gauge it, see where we're at with that. And then if we want to, we'll come back. Like I said, I can lightly sand it with a little bit of 800 dry and put 2 more coats over the top of that and probably call it done. So when we come back, we'll have this thing all cleared up and we'll wrap the video up. So stick around. All right, guys, welcome back. I have my mixture all set, ready to go. Let it sit for about 10 minutes, like we recommend. Once you reduce, let it sit for about 10 minutes. Yeah, we're ready to spray. So like I said, I'm gonna do about 3 coats. We'll let that dry up, see what I think, and if I want to, I'll give it a scuff and maybe give it like a finish coat on top of that. We'll just see how it comes out. But this is it, coat number 1. All right, guys, I want to show you something real quick. We kind of pan in on this. 2 things. A, where I stepped on my air hose and it caused the spray gun to spit. So we're going to let that completely dry. We're not going to try to come in and repair that right now or stick something in there. Let it completely dry, and it should completely go away. If anything's going to happen, it's going to be just a ring where it's a little bit heavier, where I can knock that down a little bit of 400, 800 dry. And the other thing I want to talk about is that blue. See this slight blue cast? We get a lot of questions on how to properly apply our product. It just has a very slight blue tint. I don't want it milky white like that. That would be over applied. Just that slight blue. You can actually see back here where my first pass was, it's starting to go away. It's a little wetter in this cavity right here just because I sprayed this guy, so it's kind of a double coat there. That's exactly what we want. So when we say blue cast, it just has a touch of that blue milky kind of a look to it. If it's super, super white, you over applied it. It's way too heavy. It's going to do 2 things. It could cause a re-wet of the underlying paint, and it's just going to take a long, long, long time to dry. So that's something you want to stay away from. So just that slight blue tint, and basically once that blue goes away and the product goes clear, you're kind of ready. You could touch a little, inconspicuous spot or your masking paper. Remember, dry every time we have a coat. Every time, no matter what you do. If you do 2 coats or 6 coats, you want it dry to the touch, totally dry. And if you feel it, and if it feels a little bit cold, you know it's actually still drying. So if it isn't like the room temperature of the ambient surfaces around, if it feels a little cold to the touch, that means it's still drying. So even though it's dry to the touch, if it has a little bit of cool feeling, water-based paint always feels cold as it's drying. So it's another indicator, in terms of the touch, how it feels. If it's a little bit cold, let it dry a little bit more, even maybe 5 more minutes. You're not going to cause a problem if you wait longer, right? We kind of have an unlimited time window in terms of the application, so there's no reason that pushing your envelope in terms of your time windows, it's not going to come back and bite you. It's going to be the opposite. If you try to push that or try to expedite that process, that's what's going to affect you. So take your time. Like I said, we're going to let this give a nice dry time. We'll probably do 2 more coats, see what that looks like. I actually kind of liking how it looks right now, so we probably won't mess with it unless there's something, like I said, that little spot we got to fix, but that's going to be it. So we'll see you guys in a little bit. Okay, guys, this is pretty much it. This was 3 coats, and we broke away. I was top coating this with our satin and our matte UV-LS mix, the 4051 and 4052 mixed together. And this is 3 coats. What I did was actually applied 2 coats, and I lightly sanded that with 800, and then I came back and applied 1 more just as a finish coat to kind of get rid of some of the, kind of left a little bit of the
grain mark, I guess we could call it, which is kind of just what was left over from the actual texture created, right? So I kind of leveled it out, and I actually noticed that it does still have a little bit of those character lines, which actually adds to the effect even more. It actually does look like wood because it's not totally slick and flat. So again, this is a super nice, even finish. We're going to put it into use at my mixing station right behind where I mix paint here at the booth at Createx Colors. So really cool project, really easy to do. Hope you guys learned a lot. And again, there really is no right and wrong. I want to stress that. You see what I did, just a lot of brushing techniques, a lot of airbrush and just dry brushing. It's really simple. You don't need a lot of crazy equipment. Between the colors that we have in our Wicked detail line, all those browns, those umbers, those siennas, those are great colors to kind of really develop some really cool wood, rich wood tones. So for Createx Colors, I'm Chris Arpin. Thanks for checking us out, and I'll see you guys outside. All right, guys, here we are. This is where it's going to reside. We get you guys that one last view before it gets completely covered with stuff and paint bottles and everything else. So we're going to try to keep this maintained and try to keep it pristine as possible. But this is my little corner office where, if you guys haven't seen this before, this is kind of where we mix paint and we do all the R&D, the stuff behind the scenes. So when I'm not in the booth, I'm in here. So for Createx Colors, again, I'm Chris Arpin. Thanks for checking us out. We'll see you guys next time.